The first time I realized my mother loved my sibling more than me, I was 7 years old, standing in the kitchen with a bleeding knee while she clapped for someone else. I remember the smell of burned toast, the sound of the TV humming in the background, and the way my tears slid down my face without making a sound. I had fallen outside, hard enough to scrape my skin raw. Blood soaked through my sock. I was scared. I wanted my mom, but she didn't look at me. She was too busy smiling at my sibling. That was the day I learned something no child should ever have to understand. Love can be unequal, and sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones who teach you how to disappear. Before this story continues, please like, subscribe, and comment. I see you if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. I grew up in a house where favoritism wasn't loud, it was quiet, polite, and constant. My mother never said she loved one of us more. She didn't have to. She showed it in 1,000 tiny ways that added up to something heavy and impossible to ignore. There were 2 of us. Same roof, same last name. Very different childhoods. My sibling was the golden one. The miracle. The pride. I was the background. Noise. At school events, my mother sat in the front row when they performed. When it was my turn, she checked her phone. At birthdays, one of us got parties with themes and friends and photos. The other got a cake from the grocery store and a reminder to clean up afterward. Guess which one I was? I learned early not to ask for much. Asking meant disappointment. Hoping meant pain. So I became good at being fine. Are you okay? I'm fine. Do you need help? I've got it. Those words became my armor. My sibling never had to earn approval. It was handed to them like an inheritance. Good grades were expected, mistakes were forgiven, bad behavior was excused with, "They're just sensitive." When I struggled, my mother called it weakness. When I cried, she called it drama. When I succeeded, she said, "That's nice," and changed the subject. I don't think she realized how deeply those moments cut. Or maybe she did and chose not to care. I've spent years wondering which one hurts more. As we grew older, the gap widened. My sibling got help with college applications. I filled mine out alone at the kitchen table at midnight. They got their tuition paid. I got a lecture about responsibility. They moved back home rent-free whenever life got hard. I was told, "You need to figure things out on your own." And I did. I became independent because I had no choice. While my sibling was praised for breathing, I worked 2 jobs, studied late into the night, and learned how to survive without emotional support. I told myself it didn't matter. That I didn't need her approval. That love wasn't something I should chase. But the truth is, every child chases it, even the ones who pretend they don't. Every holiday felt like a reminder of where I stood. My siblings' gifts were thoughtful, expensive, wrapped with care. Mine were practical. Socks, gift cards, things that said, "I didn't think too hard about this." One Christmas, my mother gave my sibling a car. I got a hug. People like to say, parents do the best they can. And maybe that's true. But sometimes, their best still breaks someone. I tried to talk to her once. Just once. I was in my 20s by then, old enough to name the ache, but still young enough to hope she might listen. "Did I do something wrong?" I asked her. My voice shook despite my efforts to stay calm. "Why does it feel like I'm always second?" She sighed. Not the kind of sigh that comes from reflection, but the kind that comes from inconvenience. "You're imagining things," she said. "You've always been dramatic." That word again. Dramatic. It shut me down the way it always did. Made me feel small, ashamed for wanting fairness. I apologized for bringing it up. She never apologized back. Years passed. Life moved forward whether I was ready or not. I built a career. I built relationships. I built a version of myself that didn't need approval to survive. But still, every time my mother praised my sibling, something inside me tightened. When she bragged about their accomplishments to strangers but couldn't remember my job title, it hurt. When she defended their worst choices but criticized my smallest mistakes, it hurt. When she said, "You're strong, you don't need as much," it hurt the most. Strength became the excuse for neglect. Then she got sick. It wasn't sudden. It was the slow kind of illness, the kind that creeps in quietly and changes everything over time. Hospital visits, medications, worry. Guess who she leaned on? Not the child she had given everything to. Me. I was the one who took her to appointments, the one who sat beside hospital beds, the one who managed paperwork, meals, medications, schedules, the one who put my life on hold while my sibling continued theirs, uninterrupted. And still she praised them more. "Did you hear from your sibling?" she'd ask while I adjusted her pillows. "They're so busy, but they care so much." I swallowed my resentment and kept showing up. Because love, even uneven love, can still bind you. Because some part of me still hoped that in the end it would matter. That she would see me. That she would finally say, "Thank you. I couldn't have done this without you." She never did. As her health declined, conversations about the future became unavoidable. Legal papers, decisions, the will. I told myself not to expect anything. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I didn't need validation wrapped in legal language. But late at night, alone with my thoughts, I couldn't stop the fear from creeping in. What if she left everything to my sibling? What if, even in death, she chose them over me? I tried to prepare myself for that outcome. Tried to harden my heart. Tried to make peace with the idea that fairness might never come. Still, it scared me. Because inheritances aren't just about money. They're about acknowledgement. About what someone leaves behind and who they believe mattered. And deep down, I already knew the answer. Or at least I thought I did. The day she passed was quiet. Too quiet. The house felt hollow, like it was holding its breath. My sibling cried loudly, dramatically, wrapped in sympathy. I stood in the corner numb, holding everything together like I always had. People told me how strong I was. They always did. Weeks later, we were called to hear the will. I walked into that room already braced for disappointment, telling myself not to flinch when it happened. Telling myself I didn't need anything from her anymore. But as I took my seat, I felt something strange. A tightness in my chest. A sense of unease. Like the story I had lived my entire life was about to crack open. I didn't know it yet, but everything I believed about my mother, my sibling, and myself was about to change. And when the truth finally came out, the silence that followed would be louder than anything she had ever said. I didn't cry the day my mother was buried. That fact haunted me more than anything else. Everyone else did. My sibling sobbed loudly, collapsing into relatives' arms, soaking up sympathy like it was oxygen. People whispered how devoted they were, how heartbroken they looked. I stood a few steps back, hands folded, eyes dry, feeling like something inside me had already finished grieving years ago. Maybe I had been mourning her my entire life. After the funeral, people slowly returned to their normal routines. Condolence calls stopped. Casseroles disappeared. Life moved forward. But mine stayed frozen in a strange in-between space, where exhaustion and guilt and anger took turns keeping me awake at night. Because now that she was gone, there was nothing left to distract me from the truth. I had given her everything, and I wasn't sure she had ever truly given me anything back. When her illness first worsened, I rearranged my entire life around her needs. I changed my work schedule. I turned down promotions. I stopped traveling. I became the emergency contact, the medical proxy, the one the doctors called when decisions needed to be made. My sibling always had an excuse. They were busy. They were overwhelmed. They couldn't emotionally handle seeing her like that. My mother defended them every time. "They love me," she'd say weakly from her hospital bed. "They just show it differently." I wanted to scream. What about how I showed it? What about the nights I slept on a plastic chair beside her bed? The mornings I woke up sore and stiff, then went straight to work before coming back to do it all over again? The medications I memorized? The insurance battles I fought? The fear I swallowed so she wouldn't have to see it. But I never said those things out loud. Because saying them felt selfish. Because I had been trained my entire life to believe that asking for recognition was a flaw. So I kept going. I learned how to smile through exhaustion. I learned how to sound calm when doctors delivered bad news. I learned how to be strong in ways that no one applauds. Sometimes. Late at night, my mother would reach for my hand. Her grip was weak, her skin papery and cool. "You're such a good child," she'd murmur. Not the best. Not the one she was proud of, just good. I told myself it was enough, but the resentment built anyway. It crept in quietly, the way mold grows behind walls. I didn't notice it at first. I told myself I was tired. I told myself I was grieving in advance. I told myself everyone feels this way when caregiving stretches on too long. But sometimes, when my sibling breezed in for a short visit, bringing flowers, staying 20 minutes, then leaving, I felt something dark twist in my chest. My mother's face would light up when they entered the room. "You came," she'd say, voice suddenly stronger. And I would sit there invisible again, holding the medication list in my lap. After they left, she'd sigh happily and say, "They're doing so well." I stopped correcting her. I stopped expecting fairness. Still, I stayed. When she could no longer live alone, she moved in with me. My home became a hospital. Medical equipment filled the rooms. The smell of antiseptic replaced the smell of home-cooked meals. My sleep became fragmented, my nerves constantly on edge. Some nights, I cried silently in the bathroom, staring at my reflection and barely recognizing myself. I looked older, tired in a way rest couldn't fix. Once, during a particularly bad night, I whispered to myself, "Does any of this matter?" I hated myself for thinking it. But the question wouldn't go away. My sibling visited less and less. Weeks would pass. Then months. They always had reasons. Work stress. Mental health. Travel. My mother still defended them. "Don't judge them," she'd say sharply if I expressed concern. "They're sensitive. Double quote sensitive. I wondered what that made me. Invisible. Disposable? Strong enough to carry everyone else's weight without complaint. One afternoon, while organizing paperwork, I found an envelope tucked into a drawer. It was labeled with my mother's handwriting. Inside were legal documents. A draft of her will. My heart started pounding. I hadn't meant to snoop. I told myself that over and over. But once I'd seen it, I couldn't unsee it. I skimmed just enough to confirm my fear. Everything went to my sibling. The house. The savings. The family heirlooms. My name appeared only once. As the executor. The one responsible for handling everything after she was gone. I sat on the floor for a long time after that, the papers shaking in my hands. It felt like confirmation of everything I had known but tried not to believe. Even after everything I had done, even after sacrificing years of my life, she still chose them. I put the papers back where I found them and never mentioned it. What would I have said? "Why don't you love me enough?" That question had lived in my chest since childhood. I didn't need to hear the answer out loud. From that moment on, something inside me shut down. I still took care of her. I still did everything she needed. But I stopped hoping. I stopped imagining some final redemption, some deathbed confession, where she'd finally see me. I told myself to focus on the practical things, finish strong, do the right thing, then move on. But grief doesn't work that way. Leaks. It shows up in unexpected places. I snapped at my sibling once, when they criticized how I was managing her care. "You're not here," I said quietly, my voice shaking. "You don't get to tell me how to do this." They looked offended, hurt, as if I had crossed a line. My mother scolded me afterward. "You shouldn't talk to them like that," she said. "They're doing their best." I nodded. I always nodded. When the end came, it was gentle, too gentle. She slipped away in her sleep, holding my hand. I waited for some last words. Some sign. Some acknowledgement. There was nothing. Just silence. Afterward, as arrangements were made and condolences poured in, I functioned on autopilot. I handled logistics. I comforted relatives. I made sure my sibling was okay. I didn't allow myself to feel. Then came the call from the lawyer. The will would be read. The following week, I didn't tell my sibling about the draft I had seen. There was no point. They already believed everything would be theirs. Everyone did. Friends told me not to expect much. You know how your mom was, one of them said gently. At least you know you did the right thing. I smiled. Inside, something felt unfinished. The night before the will reading, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake replaying moments from my childhood, from my adulthood, from the long months of caregiving. I wondered if I had imagined it all. If maybe love had been there, just quieter. If maybe I was wrong. But then I remembered the scraped knee. The shrugged conversations. The unequal sacrifices. No. I hadn't imagined it. Or so I thought. I walked into the lawyer's office the next day, expecting confirmation of a lifetime of neglect. I expected disappointment. I expected to walk out feeling small one last time. What I didn't expect was the way my mother's voice, through carefully chosen words, was about to speak more loudly in death than it ever had in life, and what it revealed would leave my sibling completely silent. The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and furniture polish. The kind of place where time moved slower, where voices automatically dropped to a hush. I arrived early, sitting in one of the stiff chairs with my hands folded in my lap, staring at a framed certificate on the wall without actually seeing it. My sibling arrived 10 minutes late. They always did. They walked in already emotional, already performing grief for the room. Their eyes were red, shoulders slumped just enough to invite sympathy. When they saw me, they gave a small nod, polite, distant, guarded. No hug. No shared moment of loss. Just two people who had lived under the same roof once, now separated by years of unspoken truth. The lawyer entered shortly after, a man in his late 50s with a calm voice and careful movements. He greeted us kindly, offered condolences, then asked us to take our seats around the table. My heart started pounding. I reminded myself that this was just paperwork, that nothing written on a page could change what I had already lived, that I didn't need validation anymore. Still, my chest felt tight. The lawyer opened a folder, adjusted his glasses, and began with formalities, names, dates, legal language that felt oddly cold considering it carried the weight of an entire lifetime. I barely listened. My sibling, however, leaned forward slightly, expectant, confident. I recognized that posture. It was the posture of someone who has never had to question whether they would be chosen. When the lawyer finally reached the distribution of assets, the room seemed to shrink. Even the ticking clock on the wall sounded louder. I will begin by reading the final will, he said. Final. That word echoed in my mind. He cleared his throat and began. At first, it was exactly what I expected. Familiar phrases, mentions of family, statements about love and legacy. My sibling's name appeared early, and I felt my stomach sink. But then something changed. The lawyer paused. He adjusted the papers again, his brow furrowing slightly, as if preparing to tread carefully. There is, he said slowly, an accompanying letter your mother requested be read aloud before the will is finalized. My sibling blinked. A letter? They asked. Yes, the lawyer said. It was very important to her. I froze. I had never known about a letter. The lawyer unfolded a separate page, the paper slightly worn at the edges. My mother's handwriting stared back at me from across the table. Even though the lawyer was the one holding it. My throat tightened. He began to read. My children, the letter started. If you are hearing this, then I am no longer here to speak for myself. And there are things I need to say that I never found the courage to say out loud. My siblings shifted in their chair. I felt dizzy. I was not a perfect mother, the letter continued. I made choices that were shaped by fear, favoritism, and my own unresolved wounds. And for that, I am deeply sorry. The room went very still. I had never heard my mother admit fault so plainly. The lawyer's voice remained steady, but every word landed like a stone in my chest. I relied on one child to be strong so that I could indulge the other in their fragility. I told myself I was protecting them, but in truth, I was avoiding discomfort. I leaned on responsibility where I should have offered appreciation. My sibling's face drained of color. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I knew who stayed. I knew who sacrificed. I knew who gave up pieces of their life for me without complaint. And I knew who took my love for granted. My hands started shaking. The lawyer paused briefly, allowing the weight of the words to settle. I did not say these things while I was alive because I was afraid of conflict. Afraid of losing affection. Afraid of facing the harm I caused. I swallowed hard. My siblings shook their heads slightly, as if rejecting the words outright. The lawyer continued. This letter exists because silence became my greatest regret. Something inside me cracked open. Not relief. Not triumph. Just grief so deep it hurt to sit with. Everything you believe about my intentions may not be what you expect, the letter said, and that is why this must be read first. The lawyer folded the letter carefully and set it aside. Then, he returned to the will. I will now proceed with the distribution as outlined by your mother. My siblings straightened, jaw tight. The first item was the house. It was left to me. The room seemed to tilt. My sibling laughed one sharp, disbelieving sound. That's not right, they said immediately. She promised, the lawyer raised a hand gently. Please, he said. Let me finish. The savings accounts followed. Mine. The investments. Mine. The heirlooms. Divided dash, but the most meaningful pieces, the ones tied to caregiving and memory, were assigned to me. My siblings. Inheritance was modest. Intentionally so. Enough to be fair. Not enough to reward entitlement. By the time the lawyer finished reading, my sibling was shaking. This is a mistake, they said, voice rising. She wouldn't do this. You manipulated her. The word hit me like a slap. I opened my mouth, then closed it. The lawyer spoke instead. Your mother was very clear, he said calmly. She revised this will multiple times. This was her final decision. My sibling turned to me, eyes blazing. You planned this, they accused. You turned her against me. Something inside me finally stood up. No, I said quietly. I didn't have to. They stared at me, stunned. The silence stretched. Then the lawyer added one final detail. Your mother also requested that you know this, he said, looking directly at my sibling. She wrote that love is not measured by what is given freely, but by what is sustained over time. My siblings slumped back in their chair. For the first time in my life, they had nothing to say. After the meeting ended, they stormed out without another word. No confrontation, no apology, no goodbye. Just gone. I sat there alone for a moment after staring at the table, feeling strangely hollow. I had expected vindication to feel powerful. It didn't. It felt sad. Because, even though my mother had finally acknowledged the truth, it had taken her death to do it. And even though she had corrected things on paper, she would never see the impact of her words. The lawyer asked if I was all right. I nodded. I wasn't sure if it was true. Later that evening, I returned home to an empty house that now belonged to me in ways it never had before. I walked through the room slowly, touching familiar surfaces, feeling memories rise and fall like waves. I sat on the edge of my bed and cried, not because I had won, but because I had lost so much time believing I was invisible. The letter stayed with me. Her words echoed in my mind for days. I realized something then. The will didn't expose the truth. It confirmed what I had always known. And somehow, that knowledge was both freeing and devastating. I didn't feel hatred toward my sibling. I felt clarity. And clarity, I was learning, was far more powerful than anger. But the story wasn't over yet. Because inheritance doesn't just transfer property. It transfers reckoning, and my sibling wasn't finished reacting. Not even close. The days after the will reading were heavy, almost unbearably so. I returned home, now fully the owner of the house, and the memories my mother had wanted me to preserve, yet the emptiness was profound. My siblings' absence, their cold fury, their refusal to acknowledge the truth, it all hung in the air like a storm cloud that refused to pass. I walked through the room slowly, touching furniture, tracing my fingers along walls, remembering the laughter and tears my mother had shared. Here, feeling the weight of the legacy she had entrusted to me. There was sadness in owning it alone, yes, but also a strange, grounding power. I realized that finally, After years of feeling overlooked and invisible, I had my mother's explicit recognition. Her words, her letter, her careful decisions, they were hers. Yes, but also a testament to the strength she saw in me. The first confrontation came not long after. My sibling, furious and unrestrained, showed up at the door. I wasn't surprised. I had anticipated anger, attempts at manipulation, and perhaps even threats. I didn't answer immediately. I watched them pace across the front yard, fuming, like a storm searching for a way in. Finally, I opened the door. "Emma," they began, their voice sharp and trembling. "This is ridiculous. Mom would never—" I held up my hand. "Stop," I said calmly, though inside I was quaking. Calm was necessary. Reason would be my shield. Everything that was decided is exactly as she wanted. Her letter explains why. If you cannot understand, that is your burden, not mine. They sneered, lips tightening, eyes flashing with disbelief. You manipulated her. You twisted her mind. You're selfish. I inhaled slowly, letting their words hit and fall harmlessly. I didn't manipulate anything. She made her own choices. She knew who had been there, who had sacrificed, and she honored it. That is all. The anger on their face turned to frustration. You're lying. You've always been the favorite. Everything she gave, everything she loved was for you. It's not fair. I let out a quiet sigh. Life is rarely fair. Mom acknowledged what was true. That doesn't make me the villain. It makes me the person who she trusted. The person who sacrificed without complaint. The person who stood when others walked away, their face twisted, eyes narrowing. You think this makes you better than me? I shook my head. No, it makes me recognized. For the first time in my life, my value is clear, and that clarity doesn't require your approval. They took a step back, as if they couldn't touch me with their words anymore. The truth had become a barrier. Not my words, not my tone, but the undeniable weight of my mother's will, her letter, and the recognition of decades of unacknowledged effort. The conversation ended without apology. They left, slamming the door behind them, leaving a silence that was almost reverent. In that quiet, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. There was no celebration, no vindictive laughter, only a quiet recognition that justice in its purest form had been quietly restored. The weeks following were transformative. I walked through the house each day with intention. I preserved the memories of my mother's love, and I allowed myself to grieve for the years lost under neglect and invisibility. Each item I touched, each photograph I framed, each corner of the house I cleaned, it was a meditation in reclaiming life, honoring sacrifice, and choosing resilience over resentment. I began keeping a journal, recording not only the material inheritance, but also the emotional journey that came with it. I wrote about the fear of being overlooked, the anger that had simmered for years, and the strange peace that now settled over me as the truth became undeniable. I documented memories with my mother, noting moments of teaching, guidance, and small acts of quiet love that had shaped my identity. Each entry became a monument to perseverance, a record for myself, and one day, for those who might need it. At the same time, I reached out to my sibling not to reconcile, at least not yet, but to establish boundaries. Letters were written, measured, firm. I acknowledged their grief and their pain without compromising my own hard-won sense of justice. I made it clear that the house, the assets, and the legacy were protected, and any attempts to disrupt that would be met with legal recourse. It was not easy. Some nights, I would wake with the weight of old resentments pressing down, memories of favoritism and neglect creeping in like ghosts. But each time I reminded myself, I had been seen, finally. My mother's final words had validated my existence in a way no argument or accusation ever could. The power of recognition, delayed though it was, could not be taken away. Friends became vital during this period. I invited trusted confidants into my home, shared stories, and allowed myself moments of laughter, comfort, and ordinary life. The house, once a place of quiet resentment and unspoken pain, became a sanctuary. Each day I felt stronger, more capable of living fully without needing the approval of the sibling who could not see me for who I truly was. Through this process, I learned the value of acknowledgement, not only that of my mother but that of my own self-awareness. I recognized my efforts, my sacrifices, my quiet acts of courage that had gone unseen for decades. The house, the possessions, the heirlooms, they were tangible markers of a lifetime of dedication. But the real inheritance was the validation of my own strength and integrity. Months later, I found myself walking through the garden my mother had loved. The flowers she planted bloomed in vivid colors, resilient and steadfast, much like the lessons she had imparted. I stood among them, breathing deeply, thinking about the journey I had endured. The hurt, the anger, the disappointment, all of it had forged an inner resilience I had never fully acknowledged. And for the first time, I felt completely at peace. I reflected on my sibling again, not with anger, but with understanding. Their reactions were a reflection of their own unhealed wounds, their inability to process truth, and their dependence on external validation. I no longer needed to argue or convince. Their perspective was theirs to navigate. Mine was focused forward. Over the following year, the house became more than a home. It became a center of life, warmth, and legacy. I organized family heirlooms in ways that honored my mother's wishes and created spaces where future generations could connect with her memory. I shared stories of her strength, her humor, her flaws, and her lessons, teaching those around me the power of truth and the courage it takes to live authentically. I also began volunteering, reaching out to those who had been overlooked or undervalued. Children who had struggled quietly, family members who had been ignored, anyone who had been silenced. I shared my story and my mother's lessons with them. In giving back, I felt the circle of acknowledgement expand beyond myself, beyond my mother, into the world. Eventually, I began to consider forgiveness, not for my siblings' actions, not for the cruelty of decades past, but for the weight it had carried within me. Forgiveness was not condoning, it was freedom. It allowed me to release the anger that threatened to consume the joy I was rediscovering. The letter my mother had written remained framed in the study, a daily reminder of clarity, justice, and the enduring power of recognition. Each morning, I would read it quietly, reflecting on her words and the profound lessons they carried. My mother had seen me. Finally, she had validated my life, and that validation gave me a power no resentment or injustice could diminish in time. My sibling reached out cautiously, their tone still heavy with guilt, their words faltering. I responded politely, maintaining boundaries, offering acknowledgement without reopening old wounds. I realized that their journey toward understanding and accountability was theirs alone, just as my journey toward empowerment was mine. Through it all, I discovered the ultimate lesson, that life's most meaningful victories are not about wealth or possessions, but about truth, recognition, and the courage to claim your own worth. I had been invisible for too long, undervalued and overlooked. But in the end, the clarity my mother provided, combined with my own perseverance, ensured that my life, my sacrifices, and my love were seen, honored, and respected. As I closed the final chapter of this journey, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. I had endured betrayal, inequity, and disappointment. I had faced family, societal expectations, and internal doubts. And I had emerged stronger, wiser, and fully recognized for the person I had always been. I whispered quietly to myself, thinking of my mother and the lessons she had finally shared. I am seen. I am valued. I am enough. And in that knowledge, I found freedom, joy, and a quiet but enduring triumph. If you've ever been overlooked, undervalued, or silenced, comment, I am seen, share your story, and subscribe for more inspiring real-life journeys. Your courage and perseverance deserve to be recognized.